it was a fairly easy decision for me. Again, intuitively, it was just kind of like, yeah, that's what I want to do. I want to
Mhm.
follow that. I have this curiosity for, unlocking the potential inside my body, the curiosity that I just learned from this, setback and this hardship. I want to go after that. You have two choices here. You have to embrace the limiting belief mindset of just negativity and all the reasons you can't do something. Or you can take maybe somewhat of a leap of faith, but shift your mindset towards that possible mindset, towards that belief in limitless possibilities and go, why not us? Why can't we figure this out? I told a story about the Explorers Grand Slam in Denali, but the fact of the matter is the most difficult expedition I've ever been on by far, far and away the most dangerous, the most difficult, the most brutal, even more brutal than crossing Antarctica solo for 54 days was attempting to climb K2 in winter.
Welcome to the Altitude Show. I'm your host, Dave Brinker. Have you ever dreamed about walking across Antarctica by yourself, or climbing K2 in the wintertime, or rowing a boat across the ocean? I definitely haven't, but if you're my guest today, Colin O'Brady, you definitely have. Colin is a New York Times best-selling author, a world-renowned explorer, a top speaker, and a really good friend of mine. Not only does Colin own a multitude of world records, which is definitely inspiring, but what I think is even more important is Colin's message around being possible, unlocking your potential. We talk about that. We talk about exploring the world. We talk about the tragedy that occurred on K2. We talk about when his life changed in Thailand. We talk about limitless beliefs, unlocking your best self, and many, many other things. I hope you stick around for this entire conversation. It's a really, really good one. The Altitude Show is brought to you by Peaks Equipment, the world's leading technical, hard goods, and accessories brand for backcountry enthusiasts. From trekking poles to headlamps to best-in-class gaiters, Peaks delivers a system of products that work to achieve optimal performance in the harshest conditions. Don't suffer on your hunting adventures. Peaks enables you to thrive on the mountain when everyone else is going home. Visit peaksequipment.com and use code ALTITUDE for 10% off today. That's Altitude for 10% off on peaksequipment.com. Outdoor Class is the new source of premium outdoor education from trusted and knowledgeable experts. For hunters committed to improving their skills, Outdoor Class is the only subscription-based e-learning platform that provides unlimited access to video lessons from the world's most respected experts. Learn from industry leaders like Corey Jacobson, Randy Newberg, Remy Warren, and other experts across all the topics that affect you as a hunter. Make sure to follow Outdoor Class Official on Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube, and take your game to the next level by going to outdoorclass.com. You can use code ALTITUDE at checkout for 20% off. That is Altitude at checkout for 20% off at outdoorclass.com. Colin O'Brady, how you doing today?
Great, man. It's so much fun to be here with you.
Now, I'm looking in your background there. Where are you right now?
I'm at home in Jackson Hole. I don't have as cool of a
Okay.
background as you do. Sorry about that.
Well, that's thanks to my little brother Blake, who you know very well.
I do know Blake very well. We pretty much collaborated on all the things I've done over the last 5 years.
Yeah.
He's the man. So
Well, I love
as you well
Jackson
know.
Hole. Jackson Hole is unbelievably, but the Tetons, the view of the Tetons, I think is one of the best like mountain skylines in the lower 48.
Oh, for me, by far, it's funny. I grew up in the West in Oregon, just like you. But I'd never been to Wyoming into my adult life. And then after college, 2006, I was riding my bike across country. Actually, I did this cross country bike trip, part of a fundraiser with some classmates of mine for Habitat for Humanity. And we came over the pass in Du Bois and I saw the Tetons for the first time. And it just like blew my mind. I mean, I spent a lot of time around mountains, but there's something pretty magical about the Tetons. And not to mention, someone like yourself who's a hunter, there's an elk herd in my backyard, a couple hundred elk in my backyard every single day. So it's a magical place to be in for many reasons.
Yeah, Jackson Hole, at least that area is a pretty big wintering. There, not very far from there, is a pretty big wintering ground for all the elk that live up in all those mountains. And obviously Wyoming has a huge herd of elk. it's one of the best elk hunting states, if you wanted to know, in a lot of people's opinions. So you're a very, very lucky man, and you can beat a Yellowstone in like no time, right?
Yeah, I hear. Yeah, it's like 50 miles from Yellowstone. I hear that. That because I have the in-state tag or whatever. That's like amazing, and people apply for years and years, like out of state, to be able to come to Wyoming. So
Yeah,
I
that's
guess,
true. I'm,
yeah,
yeah, it takes, as of right now, it takes about 3 or 4 years to get that tag.
yeah.
So, and they're cutting it back next year. So you're a lucky man. If you do all these adventures and stuff. If you ever want to go on an elk adventure, man, you got to let me know.
I told your brother last year. I know he got his first elk with the bow. It was a
Yeah.
big moment. I've been rooting for him for years, and after him sharing his experience with me, I was like, oh, you got to take me out, man. I'd love to experience that. I don't have very much experience. Hunting hasn't been sort of a core priority for me, but I love
Right.
the outdoors, and I love being out there and adventures, and even if nothing else, just observing, coming out with you guys sometime would be fun for sure.
Absolutely. And I think if you like adventure, you'd like hunting. That's kind of my opinion. But it's not for everybody. So a lot of people know you, Colin, sort of, especially like me, not being a endemic climber or an adventurer or anything like that. I started following you about 5 or 6 years ago. And you obviously do a lot of cool shit, which we want to talk about, like crazy stuff. For those that you don't know Colin, you listen to my intro. The guy is pretty impressive. But before we go there, Colin, I wanted to learn a little bit about where you came from. You were raised near me, right, in Oregon?
Yeah, yeah. I was actually born in Olympia, Washington. Somewhat of a funny birth story. I was born on an organic farm hippie commune. My at home on a futon with my mom. Apparently invited 20 or 30 of her hippie friends over to like hang out and celebrate. Hey, we're having a birth. So she played a Bob Marley Redemption song through my entire birth, and I came into the world where they were all hanging out and
No
partying.
way.
So that's how I came into the world. But yeah, before I can remember, 9 months old, I think I moved. My family moved to Portland, and yeah, grew up in Portland my whole life. Lived all over the world at this point, but kind of zero to 18 college age, basically, called Portland home, and my family is still in the Oregon area, spread out between Portland and Hood River mostly.
What
So
was your
yeah.
what was your family like? So obviously a little bit hippie, right? A little redemption song. By the way, I love Bob Marley, so I have nothing against that. It's not a
Yeah.
knock at all. But like very interesting birth story. Is that kind of how your childhood was?
Yeah, somewhat. I mean, I didn't grow up, I was born on this more of a communal living setting. I grew up in like a pretty normal neighborhood in Portland. But my parents were super into, my dad is still an organic farmer actually, in Hawaii, now. But my parents were super into the kind of natural foods, movement, which, in the late 80s, early 90s was kind of this hippie fringe kind of thing. And as we all know, that's kind of become a lot more mainstream to just, think about eating local, sustainable, gosh, what you guys do with hunting is probably the most, local, sustainable type of, at least, with meat and whatnot. So, they're throwing around some of those buzzwords like that, late 80s, early 90s. People were like, what the heck are you talking about? But that was really their passion, was around sort of, health and wellness by way of food and supporting, local farmers, local fishers, local ranchers, things like that, to bring, the highest quality meats, foods, to market. So that was kind of a deep passion for them. They worked in the natural foods grocery store business, usually starting out just kind of as normal shift work. They were in their early 20s, so we didn't have a lot of money when I was growing up. And then eventually they, kind of built their dream around that and started their own grocery store and things like that. But yeah, it was a great way to grow up. Being in Portland, Oregon, as you guys you grew up about an hour outside on a little more rural part of Oregon. But what's beautiful about Portland, even though it's, I guess, the big city of the state of Oregon, is, you can drive 15 minutes in any direction and you're in wilderness. You drive 30 minutes, 45 minutes, you're in amazing wilderness. And so, as a kid, we didn't have a ton of money, but my dad used to always say to me, he's like, the outdoors are free. And he was an Eagle Scout. And so we spent most of our, leisure time as kids, driving 30 minutes outside of Portland and going exploring an alpine lake, going hiking on a trail, going backpacking, things like that. And so I feel super grateful to have grown up in the Pacific Northwest, because it's just such a beautiful area to explore. And even though I spent a lot of my life there, there's still just endless new parts of that area that I still haven't seen.
Yeah, I guess it used to be very highly rated. Now it's kind of got a lot of knocks against it, and some of them rightfully so. But it remains a pretty amazing state, even though there's a lot of division and stuff in the political side. But if you actually look outside that, it's actually pretty crazy how diverse. Like if you're an outdoors person, how diverse the Pacific Northwest is. There's a lot of cool stuff to do. There's not enough time to do all of it. This period, like you can't.
No, I mean you could spend, if you could take the whole, up into Washington, all the way down to the northern half of Oregon, whatever. Like just that is a lifetime of exploration between the mountains and the high alpine and deserts and all that kind of stuff, for sure.
Yeah. So your parents were way ahead of the curve. My grandfather was similar to your parents. And obviously that led to a lot of cool things in terms of just business opportunity for them. So as you became a teen, you must have been pretty intelligent, because I read somewhere that you ended up going to Yale.
Yeah, I guess there's a general level of intelligence. It's funny. That was not necessarily my path in the world. I had no exposure to New York City or the Northeast prep school sort of culture. Like that was all very outside of scope for me. So much so that I was a nationally ranked swimmer, which was what kind of gave me the level up. Obviously, I had good grades and stuff like that, but I was recruited nationally for swimming. And the Yale swim coach called me the summer before my senior year of high school to recruit me. Called my home phone number. Phone rings. Says, "Hi, it's Colin there." I said, my mom passed me the phone. This is back in the day of landlines, right? So it calls the home landline. Pick up the phone, and I said, "Hi, this is Colin." The coach said, "Hi, this is the swim coach from Yale University. We're excited to, offer you a recruitment opportunity." And my first response was, "Yale, I think I've heard of that, but where is that?" So my mom was just shaking her head like, "Oh my God, I did a terrible job parenting you." No, it was an incredible opportunity, but to say the least, a public school kid from Portland, Oregon, from a middle to lower class income family, to move to Connecticut and be at Yale was certainly a culture shock for me. At the end, I was super grateful for the education. Met some amazing friends, enjoyed swimming there for 4 years, all the things, but it was a big shift for me. It's a big change, completely different kind of way of life to be exposed to. That's for sure.
What made you a good swimmer? I mean, what makes is it talent? Is it the way your body's sort of organized? Like obviously Michael Phelps, when I look at him, I'm like, duh. He just looks like a swimmer. Like he looks like he's going to be an amazing swimmer.
Yeah. Michael Phelps and I are actually about the same age. Funny enough, we're like within a few months of each other. I didn't know him at all growing up. But he was from Baltimore, but there's these like national rankings list for your age group that would come out from 9 years old, 10 years old, 11, whatever, when you're kids. And he was like always this name on the top. I think the highest I ever got was fifth. I was fifth ranked in the country in breaststroke. And I was like, who is this Michael Phelps guy who's like on every list? And all of a sudden, of course, now we know how that story plays out. You're like, right. Oh, right. Yeah. Got it. Yeah. Like the greatest Olympic athlete of all time, right. Casual 22 gold medals. Yeah, I mean, he certainly, I was reading something that, mastery of something is sort of like when your determination and willingness to suffer for something also meets your innate ability, right? So, I mean, his body is built for it, just straight up genetically built for it. But then he also had the determination, the coaching, the support to go for it and to commit himself to it fully. And so I think that's a perfect marriage of skills. For me, I'm 6 foot tall, but my dad's funny enough. My dad's 5'7". I'm 6 foot. So I got a few inches on him, which was great. But he gave me his sort of smaller hands, smaller feet. So I always joked around. I was like, if I had just like normal proportion hands and feet, I think I could have been an even better swimmer. But the one thing about swimming that prepared me for the stuff I, have gone on to do, which I'm sure we'll talk about, walking across Antarctica solo, climbing Everest a couple of times, setting multiple world records in these sort of intense endurance sports is obviously there's a cardio, a physical component to swimming. I mean, the whole thing is basically this intense high-end cardio. But the part that I didn't quite realize when I was a kid that I've reflected on since then is swimming is like the most mind-numbingly boring sport ever. Like, it's not team sports. It's not like when you're like playing with your buddies basketball, you're kind of like, jiving with them a little bit, maybe talking a little shit, whatever, joking around with your buddies. Like, that's team sports, right? Or ball sports, or even, something like track and field. That's a more individual sport. Like, you're walking around the track, you're jogging around the track, you're talking with people, whatever. When you're swimming, there are other people in the pool, but your head is underwater, sensory deprivation tank, basically. Can't see anything, can't hear anything, can't talk to anyone, can barely freaking breathe. And you're staring at a black line at the bottom of the pool, like just going back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. And swimming, since it's low impact on the body, compared to running or something like that, you can actually just put more hours into it. So typically, I mean, even from sort of early teenage, 12, 13, 14 years old, I was swimming 4 hours a day, 6 days a week, like Jeez. Head under the water, just grinding. And it's funny because I've come from a big family. I'm a very extroverted person. My siblings always like, you can never be alone. And when I look back now, since I've done so much alone, solitude, adventuring stuff at this point, I'm like, yeah, when I had my head above water, I just wanted to talk to people because I was spending 4 hours a day in this sensory deprivation tank. I was just desperate to be able to talk to some people. So it's kind of funny how that goes. But I do think that swimming was a really great, a great inroads for, like I said, not just the physical, but ultimately the mental.
Did you do other sports, or why did you choose swimming?
I was actually a national ranked soccer player as well. So swimming and soccer were kind of my parallel sports. I would sort of alternate them and sometimes do them both full time, depending on the time of year. And then interestingly enough, the college recruitment decision I mentioned before somewhat dictated my path. I was equally passionate about both of them. And in fact, maybe in few ways enjoyed soccer a little bit more. But I was really young for my grade. Actually, I skipped third grade, which because maybe my fractions in cursive were just, on point. But that meant I was super young for my grade. So I was 16 my senior year of high school, which I was on this, very successful, youth soccer team. I think about 8 or 9 of the starting 11 ended up going to Division I universities. Another 5 or 6 of those guys ended up playing the MLS. Like, it was a good team. We played all over the kind of West Coast and the regional area of the U.S. And I was the captain, leading goal scorer on that team. But when college recruitment came around, which was important for me, given my financial circumstance as a kid, it was interesting because the kids that were getting recruited were the grade above me. I was a grade too young, right? Excuse me, how I said it. I was a year too young. So all the other guys in my team were juniors when I was a senior. And so the coaches, in terms of getting recruitment, were like, oh, we're not recruiting your age group until next year. And I was like, well, I'm a senior, they're all juniors. So it was just like this kind of weird thing. And I got a little bit of recruitment, kind of regionally, but on a national level, it was just harder because people were waiting one more year to recruit that class, if that makes sense. Whereas swimming, they don't have to see you play the sport. You don't have to have like a highlight reel or something like that. It's just super objective. It's like, my 100 breaststroke time is this. And they're like, great, come swim for us. And so interestingly enough, that actually, it was kind of a coin flip between what I liked more, and would have gotten recruitment, at a pretty high level, probably in both. But, in the end, that was what kind of was the decision maker, is that swimming was just a little easier for people to just be like, oh, it doesn't matter what grade or age you are, that's a great time or whatever.
It seems to me, though, that you probably could have been, you're a naturally athletic and driven person. It seems like you probably could have been good at just about any sport you put your mind to. Do you think that's a true statement?
That's very kind of you to say. I've always loved sports as a kid. I've never, maybe just because I haven't put the time into it, but I've never been much of a golfer, a tennis, or a really great hand-eye coordination kind
Did
of.
you
You
ever
know,
wrestle?
I haven't wrestled. I know you. I know you guys grew up
I
wrestling.
didn't wrestle. It's one of my biggest regrets, actually.
Okay, but I know Blake did.
Blake
I
did,
know
yeah.
Blake did. Your brother. Wrestling is a badass sport. Like, there's a couple of sports that I look at from afar, and have known people that have done them, and I go like, those people are like hardcore. Not just because it's like combat sports. That's the one thing taking the beating like that, but wrestling. The other one I look at is crew. Like
Mm,
rowing, that's just like an insanely grind of a painful sport. That's same
hmm
kind of like swimming, where you're just like staring at the back of some dude's head, just like putting as much muscle into something.
hmm
But wrestlers, man, every wrestler I know, has some crazy interesting story about just like grit and resilience and the training and cutting weight and all this kind of stuff. But yeah, no, I never wrestled myself, but I've been around some wrestlers and some professional MMA guys that I've trained with over the years, and
Where
it's an impressive thing.
did you get in trouble? Were you out partying, or were you a pretty dedicated, like, you know, straight A student?
No, I was the opposite of a. I mean, I did good well in school, but the joke is, I would say to my parents, I'm sneaking out. You can't give me a curfew. I'm gonna do whatever the heck I want. And they'd be like, "What do you mean? You're 14 years old. You can't just like go out." I mean, I was sneaking out. I was going to parties. I was was the youngest. Ultimately, I have 6 older siblings, 5 older sisters, blended family, but we all grew up together. So I was the youngest, and I was the most precocious and in trouble constantly. But my fallback, I don't know if I'd like this if my own kids did this to me, but I basically was like, I'm getting straight A's at school and I'm a nationally ranked athlete. So you can't give me, until that isn't the case. This is my like 13-year-old, 14-year-old mentality. Until that isn't the case, you should let me do whatever the hell I want. And they're like, what do you mean? You're 14 years old. But since I was so young for my grade, all of my friends who are my peers, got their driver's license like a year, 2 years in front of me. Right. So I remember my childhood best friend, he's 2 years older than me. So or just a little over 2 years older than me. So I was 13 still, and he got his driver's license at 16. Right. So like, that's a big, a couple years when you're an adult, it's like nothing, but like difference between 16 and 13, like that's a big gap. And I was a little too big for my britches. So yeah, we were foolish as kids. We would, we were drinking young and doing silly stuff and getting in trouble and whatnot. But it was interesting. It was like this balance of like, but I'm still focused on swimming well, but I'm still focused, that was kind of I don't know if that literally my bargaining chip with my parents. It's kind of like I have earned my freedom, so to speak, to do what the hell I want. They didn't necessarily agree. But I certainly tried to force that on them.
That's hilarious, man. And to your point, that's kind of how the professional. This is how I view the professional world right now. It's like, if you can get your work done, I don't care if you're in the office or not. If you're like really good at doing your shit, doesn't matter to me, work remote. But if you can't do your shit, then yeah, you're probably more the type of person that has to have the accountability of showing up to the office every day. But you're obviously a you've obviously always had the gift of being disciplined, which is a perfect sort of segue. So when you got out of Yale, you had this incredibly successful career in swimming. I mean, anything D1 is, people don't realize how hard it is to do anything Division One. I mean, the difference between a state champion high school athlete and a nationally ranked Division One college athlete is tremendous. I mean, we all kind of hopefully know that by now. But so after you get out of that, you decide to go backpacking, right? Like, you decide to do this backpacking trip around the world, which is, many people's dreams, but you actually do it.
Yeah, it's funny. You said something that kind of rang true for me, which is I hadn't thought about. Hey, this is good. These are great questions, man. I hadn't thought about, did I mess around when I was growing up, or did I get in trouble or whatnot? I think that my orientation, and it leads into this backpacking question, was always trying to look at life a little bit differently. Like, not trying to necessarily break the rules for the sake of being rebellious, but also just kind of trying to like hack life a little bit. Like, just going like, okay, everyone's turning right. Do I need to turn right or should I turn left? Like, how can I optimize this and to win, like, over time, how to do that while making money, how to do that while having a fulfilling life, how to do that with a vet. I mean, ultimately this book that I know we're going to talk about, my new book, The 12-Hour Walk, is essentially about this, which isn't necessarily about being counterculture in every moment, but evaluating your life through each step of the way to really check in and say, is this right for me? Is this not? And so after college, 2006, I graduated with an economics degree from Yale. Significant percentage of my classmates are taking Wall Street jobs. And they're getting offered these, crazy amounts of money, 120 grand right out of college with a $20,000 signing bonus. I mean, that's an incredible amount of money for any person of any age, let alone, some 22-year-old kid right out of college. Like it's crazy, but there's that pipeline from these, Ivy League universities basically to Wall Street. And I remember, interestingly enough, like a couple of guys on the swim team who had graduated a couple of years above me, so they were living in New York City, kind of doing these jobs. I went and visited them a couple of times, while I was still in college, and they were making all this money. But I remember going over to a buddy's apartment, and he'd been working for a year, making all this money, whatever. And he said, I got an empty shoebox apartment in Manhattan with a mattress on the floor, nothing on the walls, and like no furniture. And I'm like, bro, like, I don't, what, like, what's the deal? And he was like, oh man, like I like don't even ever come here. Basically. Like I sleep in the office, 4 days a week. I'm working 100 hours a week. And it wasn't so much the hard work, quote unquote, like the hard, like it wasn't like I'm someone who's willing to work hard and be disciplined, but to what end? And I was like, kind of like, there was just something inside of me at that moment was like, I know this sounds ridiculous, and maybe, I'll come back around to it. And I did dip my toe in finance years later for a very brief period of time. But I was like, I don't know, like this doesn't seem to be the obvious answer, even though all my peers at this time were like, what do you mean? Like, this is what you do. It's 2006. This is pre 2008, Wall Street credit crisis crash. Wall Street's high in its hog. You've got this incredible, quote unquote, once in a lifetime opportunity and education to go there. Like, why not? And I was like, everyone's like, well, what are you going to do? Do you have a job after college? And so in Portland, when I was 15, 16, a buddy of mine, David, and I, we started painting houses every single summer just to, pay the bills and ultimately, get enough money for books and a few beers and stuff like that, during the school year. And I always had this dream of traveling around the world. Like I didn't get to travel a ton when I was a kid. And I was just like, I want to see the world. I want to see what's out there basically. And so from about 16 all the way through college, I painted these houses in the summer and socked away, $1,000, $2,000 every single year. So I was like, when I graduate, I'll have enough money to do something. And enough money ended up being, I don't know, probably less than $10,000, but enough for a one-way plane ticket to somewhere where I could, I ended up hitchhiking around New Zealand, sleeping on friends' couches and floors, whatever, youth hostels, trying to live off 10, $20 a day. I mean, as cheap as you could possibly go, that was me, but I was out there, I was doing it. I was out in the world experiencing something different, which was a really incredible experience as a young person. And then ultimately, unfortunately, led to maybe the worst difficult experience, definitely of that time in my life, but maybe ever in my life, which was I was in this small island in rural Thailand. And I, 22 years old, precocious, not fully formed prefrontal cortex, I suppose. And I see a couple guys jumping a flaming jump rope. And I think, heck yeah, that looks like fun. Couldn't really assess the risks of that. And it changed my life in an instant. I tangled myself in this rope wrapped around my legs, lit my body on fire to my neck, and ended up having to, jump in the ocean instinctively to save my life, but not before about, 25% of my body was severely, burned badly.
So did it caught your clothes on fire? Obviously, like you had a t-shirt and
yeah, I was wearing t-shirt, shorts, no shoes. No shoes ended up being a big issue because my feet got really badly burned. And
it caught your skin on fire.
Yeah. So what ended up happening, best we can kind of piece back together. Obviously, it all happened so fast. Which is they soak these ropes in kerosene and then they light them and. They had just recently lit this fully doused rope, meaning there was still excess kerosene on the rope. So when it hit me and tangled me, that kerosene then splattered my body. And then the kerosene on my body like ignited really quickly up my body. And so it's just kind of it's funny. You can YouTube this, like people jump in a flaming jump rope in Thailand. You'll see like people, it's a somewhat a common activity, drunk, stupid backpackers on the beach in Thailand doing this. And of course, people have gotten hurt, but in general, what happens, people do trip, of course, but usually the rope just bounces off your ankle or your leg, kind of like your finger through a candle flame, and nothing happens. But it just was sort of a perfect storm for me. And like I said, in an instant in my life, Jamie, I was just lit on fire. I come out of the ocean, skin's hanging off my legs really bad, immediately kind of go into shock. And there's no ambulance ride, there's no proper medical facility. I'm on a tiny island in the Gulf of Thailand, like Thailand, let alone like rural, remote, middle of nowhere Thailand. And I end up getting a moped ride down a dirt path to this like one-room shack. Brutal set of circumstances. I ended up going to several surgeries in remote Thailand. And
in the shack?
So in the shack for 24 hours, and then moved to this other island that had like a very, very small kind of hospital that was mostly there for like dive accidents, because like a scuba diving area. So they had some medical facilities for like scuba diving, but it wasn't like a proper OR. But what I learned about burns pretty quickly is you're so, the skin is the largest organ on the body, right? And so your body is pretty messed up when you get burned. People die from infection. There's all sorts of complications. But you can't just like move around easily. Like literally you can't like get in an ambulance or fly somewhere or anything like that. And so basically for the first week or so, they had to do these surgeries right where I was. And I would come out of this makeshift sort of ICU, like to paint the picture. There was a cat running around in my bed and across my chest. I mean, it was grim, it was a bad set of circumstances.
That's not good.
No. But it's interesting because when I look back on this is also a significant turning point in the end, sort of in a positive direction in my life. I know it's strange to say that, but my mother, an incredible woman that she is, she came and found me essentially, on the other side of the world 4 or 5 days into this ordeal. And she shows up in my hospital room. And I know you have kids. I can only imagine what it's like to be a parent, see your kid just in so much pain and so much distress. And the doctor had told me, not just the physical pain, but the doctor had told me, hey, look, Colin, you will probably never walk again normally. Like the way your legs are burned, the way the ligaments are damaged, like you're not probably going to regain full mobility. And to me as a lifelong athlete, just my identity is so wrapped up in the physicality of my body.
Right.
It's just, I remember I remember the physical pain, but more than anything, I remember the emotional devastation of that moment. I'm just like what? So that was brutal. But my mom, she'll tell me now that she was crying in the hallways with the doctors, pleading for good news, trying to get any semblance of good news from them. But she actually never showed me that fear. Instead, she actually kind of came into my hospital room with this insane smile on her face, this huge air of positivity. You heard this like daring me to look towards the future, like set this measurement. What do you want to do when you get out of here? Like, let's dream big. Your life isn't over. I'm like, Mom, my life's over. And she literally says to me, she goes, close your eyes and visualize some sort of positive outcome a year from now, 2 years from now. Like, what are you doing? And I didn't want to play along with her stupid game. Honestly, I was in such a bad headspace. But I finally was like, fine, whatever. And I closed my eyes and she sees me smile for a second. She's like, what do you see? And I said, this is going to sound ridiculous. I was like, but I saw myself crossing the finish line of a triathlon. I'd swam, obviously, like I said, but I'd never biked or run, competitively. I'd never done a triathlon, but it came to me in this moment. And my mom could have easily said, yeah, I said set a goal, but I mean, the legs and the maybe something a little more realistic, right?
Right.
But instead, she didn't say that. Instead, she was like, great. In fact, that's your goal. In fact, you should start training for that today. And she yells out to the doctor, hey, doc, my son's training for a triathlon now. So can you actually get him some weights? And the doctor's like, what the hell are you talking about? And she convinces this Thai doctor to bring in, I've got this funny picture of me lifting 10-pound dumbbells in a Thai hospital with my body bandaged from the waist down. And the doctor's looking at me like, this stupid American kid's never going to walk again normally. What the hell? But that was a moment, a switch was flipped. And even in the new book, the 12-hour walk, I coined this phrase. I've said it for a long time, but it's a really front and center concept in the book, that I really feel like I learned from my mom in this moment, or really calcified in new ways, which is what I call a possible mindset, an empowered way of thinking that unlocks a life of limitless possibilities. In this moment of this diagnosis, this depth of despair, the first thing that happened, and it's super common for any of us, is all of my limiting beliefs. My life is over. I fucked up. I'm never going to be the same. This is horrible. All the terrible pieces of this. And my mom encouraged me to not pretend like this wasn't a bad situation. She's like, this is a bad situation, but you still have limitless possibilities in your future. So let's start thinking about that. Let's switch our mindset toward the positive and figure out what that actually means. Long story short, towards the end, the culmination of the story is I flew back to Oregon. I was in a wheelchair. I was carried on and off the plane. My mom helped me learn how to walk again, literally step by step, by placing a wooden chair in front of my wheelchair. You take one step to here, you take two steps to here. But eventually, after 18 months of rehab and rehabilitation, I kept that triathlon goal front and center. I'd moved to Chicago to take a job, and I signed up for the Chicago Triathlon. And I ended up racing the Chicago Triathlon, my first triathlon ever. And to my complete and utter surprise, I didn't just finish the race, which was my goal, but I actually won the entire Chicago Triathlon, placing first out of about 5,000 other people on the day. It's an interesting moment, because it'd be easy to be like, oh, well, then I must have just thought, oh, I'm impervious. I'm some superhuman athlete. I can do whatever I want, jump a flaming jump rope, get burned, come back, win, ridiculously big triathlon race. But that's not where my mind went. And when I've even over all the years that have gone by since then, when I reflect on that moment, I reflect on this moment with my mom, like wondering what would have happened had my mom not forced me to switch to that possible mindset, switch towards that positive outcome. Where would my life be now? I certainly wouldn't be sitting here with 10 world records. I certainly wouldn't be sitting here and talking to you, most likely. Who knows, where my body, mind, and soul would have been, because I think I was on the precipice of really immense emotional defeat. Mm-hmm. But it also taught me that as humans, not just me, every single person, and again, the 12-hour walk, the book I just wrote, is about every single person and our capacity to unlock these wells, these deep wells and reservoirs of untapped potential inside of us, to achieve extraordinary things, to find depth and fulfillment and strength within ourselves. It all exists there. There's no doubt about that in my mind. And unfortunately, I had to learn that lesson the hard way. And sometimes I think that that's probably the way that us as humans have to learn things. We have to be in intense, extreme situations to take some hard-earned lessons along our path and our journey.
Yeah, absolutely. That's an incredible story, as you know. And so the triathlons, they obviously they kept building. For those that don't know you, you're incredibly successful at triathlons, and triathlons are fucking really hard. I've never done one, but my wife was into them for a while. She did sprints, and I would go to them. And I'm like, dude, I've always wanted to do one, to be honest with you, and I still might. But with the training regimen is a little bit outside my scope of free time right now. But you get successful at these triathlons. Again, another example how you naturally have this well-oiled mental toughness. Like, I don't know where this comes from, but I'm trying to dive in the psyche here, like where this like drive to do really hard things comes from. Then you kind of start getting into adventuring. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so I raced triathlon professionally, funny enough, again, cutting against the grain a little bit. I did for a brief moment, as I mentioned, I got a job in finance in Chicago. Kind of after burning this fire, I was kind of like, okay, maybe I, should just, follow the path, do the thing.
And make money, buy things.
Yeah, exactly. And, I get this job in that interim time, and I end up quitting my job actually right after winning the Chicago Triathlon. I met another guy in the trading industry who heard the story, and he's like, this is insane. you should do more triathlons. And I was like, yeah, I'm definitely going to train some more. Like, this will be fun. We'll have this job. And he was like, I kind of told him, I always had this dream of making the Olympics, and triathlon's an Olympic sport. Over the last 20 years or so, it's been a new-ish Olympic sport. And I said, yeah, I'd love to chase that dream. It's my childhood passion, but I gotta have a job. I gotta get by. I can't just train for triathlon all the time. And he basically offers me my first sponsorship. But he says to me, he goes, yeah, he's very straight up. He was like, I'll give you enough money to if you're serious about this, to buy a few plane tickets, get you to a few races and whatnot. But to be clear, that professional sport is not like the NBA or the MLB or something like this where you make real money. It's like more me sleeping on my buddy's couches, eating peanut butter and jelly sandwiches back into my traveling days. And at the time, like I said, I'd actually had a good job, and making decent money and stuff like that. But it was a fairly easy decision for me. Again, intuitively, it was just kind of like, yeah, that's what I want to do. I want to follow that. I have this curiosity for, unlocking the potential inside my body, the curiosity that I just learned from this, setback and this hardship. I want to go after that. And so that's exactly what I did. That's exactly what I did. I ended up racing triathlon professionally for about 6 or 7 years. It wasn't glamorous at times, but it did give me the opportunity to travel and experience a lot of the world. I raced in 25 countries on 6 different continents, lived all over the world. It was an incredible moment. I didn't quite make my goal of making the Olympics. I fell just short of that, but I had the opportunity to really push my body. And then your question about adventure, there was sort of this another turning point for me, which was this moment. I actually got engaged in 2014. My wife, we've been together since before the burn accident. I'd met her when I was traveling on that trip. So we've been together for almost 15 years now. But we get engaged and we're on this mountaintop. We got engaged in Ecuador, actually, because I've been racing down there, and we climbed a mountain in Ecuador and I proposed. And we're standing on the top of this incredibly beautiful mountain. She just says yes. And I think, somewhat I was inspired by my mom in the Thai hospital, inspired by the way I started, thinking about the world differently. I was like, let's dream without limits. Let's conjure this possible mindset in this moment of we're engaged. What do we want our life to be like? What are our passions? What are our dreams? What dreams haven't we reached yet? Kind of forget about the constraints of our life. Let's just, wipe those away for just 1 second for fun. Let's just dream. Right. And I start telling her, and she already knew this. I was like, I always dreamed about climbing Mount Everest since I was a little kid. That's been a dream of mine. I remember reading John Krakauer's Into Thin Air and as a 12, 13-year-old and being like, oh, one day I want to, see the Himalayas, go to Everest, and talking to her about climbing mountains. We're on a mountaintop, and she's like, oh, that'd be amazing. And if anyone knows anything about Everest, it's really expensive and remote and complicated, and all this stuff. And this dreaming keeps going on. We talk about, we want to have impact in the world. We want to help young people, reach their goals and their dreams. So we dream up this whole thing on this mountaintop with this sort of possible mindset that I call. And we say to ourselves, okay, if we could do anything, I want to go after a world record now. I want to keep pushing my body, but in a different way in triathlon, which is something called the Explorer's Grand Slam. And that's to climb Everest, but also to climb the tallest mountain on each of the 7 continents, collectively known as the 7 summits, as well as complete expeditions to the North Pole and the South Pole. And Jenna and I say, in triathlon, the exposure or the impact of my racing is somewhat limited. So a sponsor's happy if I win or not, or a few people on the inside of triathlon kind of know what's going on, but it doesn't have that broad of a reach. We thought, well, if we did this project at scale, maybe we could start a nonprofit and start to have impact at scale, using sort of the breadth and depth of a big world record global project. And so our biggest goal really is to start this nonprofit and have impact towards kids and kids' health. So that all happens. And how would I put this? We get back to our 1-bedroom apartment in Portland where we were living when we got engaged. And I think if you're listening to this, you can probably relate to this. This is the moment where most good ideas and big ideas just fail, right? You're riding this high, you're drinking beers with your buddy, you have a few beers, you're like, yo, we're going to train for that triathlon. We're going to start that business. It's going to be fucking epic. Whatever. And then you wake up on Monday with a hangover and you call your buddy and you're like, yeah, man, what are we talking about? This is like, we don't have any, well, there's no way we could do this. And Jen and I sat there in a 1-bedroom apartment. We're like, we have no money. We have no resources. We have no network. We have no idea how to do this. We've only a few $1,000s to our name and our life savings, right? Like all of these limiting beliefs come up in our mind, which in a lot of ways are justifiable. It's like, yeah, that was a fun thing to dream about, but how the hell are we going to pull this off? Like just going to Everest alone is 50 grand. You start adding the North Pole, the South Pole, and the tallest mountain in Antarctica. I mean, pretty quickly you're like, oh, this project costs $500,000. Like what the hell are we? We're 20 something years old. I'm like, this is ridiculous. But again, like, I want to talk more about it because I'm so passionate about it right now. But like the book that I just wrote, The 12-Hour Walk, is about this moment that we have in our life, these inflection points when our minds are flooded with limiting beliefs. I don't have enough money. Why am I not living my best life? I don't have enough money. I don't have enough time. What if people criticize me? What if I fail? I'm not strong enough. Like, right? Like I've been there. We've been there. We've all been there. And the 12-Hour Walk, my new book, through the lens of these, adventures that we'll talk about, climbing Everest and walking across Antarctica solo and rowing a boat across Drake Passage, edge of your seat, fun, narrative. It is also ultimately about how all of us, and through this call to action where I invite people to take their own 12-hour walk, and we'll talk about that a little bit more, I'm sure, but how we all have the ability to break through these limiting beliefs. And in this moment, when we're dreaming about our first project, that's exactly what it was. Like, you have two choices here. You have to embrace the limiting belief mindset of just negativity and all the reasons you can't do something. Or you can take maybe somewhat of a leap of faith, but shift your mindset towards that possible mindset, towards that belief in limitless possibilities and go, why not us? Why can't we figure this out? And we're like, okay, we've got Google. How do you get sponsorships? Google. How do you set up a 501c3 nonprofit? And I'll tell you what, the first 1,000 answers we got to that were people slamming a door in our face going, no, why would we sponsor this? You've never even done any polar travel. Why do you think you can trek to the North Pole? Like, you've never climbed mountains before. Like, who the hell do you think you are? Like, no. And so it's not as if this just clicked, but for 18 months, we were like, this is our dream. This is our passion. And we woke up every single day and chipped away at it, sent emails, knocked on doors, internet stalked, people on LinkedIn to try to help us, like whatever. And ultimately we did raise just enough money by the skin of our teeth. There's a whole story about that and sort of the abundance versus scarcity mindset as it relates to the limiting belief. I don't have enough money in the 12-Hour Walk, the new book. But it ultimately, we got there. We got there to the start line, I should say. And then I had to actually pull off this expedition, which was to try to set the world record in 139 days of consecutive nonstop climbing from Everest to Denali to Kilimanjaro to North Pole to South Pole, back to back, all the while generating this insane logistics and the start of our nonprofit and stuff in the background. But that was really the leap. It was 2016, the leap into this crazy life of adventure that I've been living for the last several years since then.
What year was that?
2016. So we dreamed it up in 2014 and then spent about a year and a half planning it. And then I ultimately did set my first 2 world records for the Explorers Grand Slam and the 7 Summits in 2016 after 139, basically from the beginning of 2016 through till May of 2016.
Out of all the mountains that you've climbed this far, what has been the most challenging?
It's a good question. Of the 7 summits, there's sort of 2 that are the obvious most difficult. So the list includes, Kilimanjaro in Africa, Aconcagua in South America, Mount Vinson in Antarctica. But Everest and Denali, I think, are the clear 2 most difficult. Everest, obviously, being the tallest mountain in the world, there's so much difficulty there. People die on that mountain every single year. There's all sorts of risks. But Denali, in a lot of ways, is a close second, if not in some ways more difficult. It's about 8,000 feet lower. So that obviously in some ways lessens the difficulty of the high altitude, although 20,000 feet or so is still significantly high. But Denali's remote. And I try to climb somewhat as independently as I can, but on Everest, there's sort of a collection of people that are kind of, pooling resources to put one fixed rope. People are using a lot of, research. I mean, I wasn't, climbing with a guide or anything like that, but I, climbed with a friend of mine who's a Sherpa, and we were climbing together and whatnot. And so there's something about that dynamic that does sort of shift things. Whereas Denali really is a self-sufficient kind of mountain inside the U.S. National Park there. You can't hire a porter to carry your stuff. There's no fixed ropes, things like that. So you really got to be a pretty dialed in mountaineer and understand about glacier travel and crevasses and ice falls and ice axe work and cramp. You really got to have your shit dialed. And it's Denali has brutal, rough, insane weather. Funny quick aside, I had summited Everest. I had a really hard time summiting Everest, and I come back down to Camp 4. So Everest has 4 camps above base camp. You usually climb, it takes usually a couple months to climb Everest. I ended up climbing it in 3 weeks, which was kind of the edge of, human capacity with acclimatization and whatnot. Because I was coming from the North Pole. And I call my wife Jenna on a sat phone at Camp 4, just completely exhausted, having just summited Everest, taking me 12 hours, up and down just from the top part of the mountain. I'm still days away from climbing all the way back down to base camp and safety. At this point, I'd done 8 of the 9 expeditions for the Explorers Grand Slam, and I needed to climb Denali. And I was about a month ahead of the Explorers Grand Slam world record. Denali usually takes about 3 weeks to climb. So I call my wife and I say, hey, I just summited Everest. I'm exhausted. It just took me an hour to take my boots off and get inside my tent. I'm going to rest here for a while till tomorrow and slowly start making my way back down to hopefully more relative safety. I mean, granted, Camp 4 is at 26,000 feet. That's still known as the death zone. Like the human body, you're still in a really compromised, vulnerable spot there. Any good mountaineer will tell you, you don't really celebrate a climb until you're back down. About 80% of accidents happen on the descent. And 3 people actually died on Everest that same day that I summited in 2016. And I'm on my way, I'm there, and I get on the sat phone call, and she's like, so you summited? And I was like, yeah. And I was like, she's like, no frostbite, no injuries. I'm like, no, I'm exhausted, but I don't have any injuries or anything like that. She's like, okay, great. Then she said something I will never forget for the rest of my life. She says to me over the sat phone connect, she goes, well, in that case, I need you to put your boots back on right now. I'm like, what? What are you talking about? She's like, yeah. I've been doing some sort of research, and it so happens that if you can get to the summit of Denali in the next week, you can set not 1, but 2 world records, not just the Explorers Grand Slam, but the 7 summits. And I'm like, wait, is that Denali in the next week? I'm in the death zone on Everest. Denali takes 3 weeks to climb. What the hell are you talking about? She goes, no, okay. Put your boots back on right now. I've made a plan. Go in one single push all the way back down to base camp. And in base camp, I've set up a helicopter that will take you from base camp to Kathmandu. There's no time for you to sleep overnight in a hotel or shower or any of this, but an evening flight will take you from Kathmandu to Dubai, Seattle to Alaska. And instead of 3 weeks to climb Denali, you'll have 3 days. But if you could do all that, 2 world records. And I'm like, am I hallucinating? What the hell is she talking about? Right, this is ridiculous. But she also knows how competitive and driven I am. So she knows if she dangles a carrot, it's something I'm going to at least try. And one of my favorite quotes that I've lived by for a really long time, that's really been a good anchor in my life, which is, it was said by Henry Ford, and some variation of it's been attributed to Confucius over the years. But it's basically, he who says he can and he who says he can't are both usually right. Mm-hmm. And I had no idea if we could pull off Jenna's ridiculous plan, but I did know I could at least follow her first step, put the boots back on. So I did that. And somehow just 100 hours after standing on the summit of Everest, I found myself on the other side of the world at the base of Denali, and ended up climbing Denali in just 3 days. Now, climbing Denali in 3 days, to answer your first question about the most difficult mountain, in 3 days instead of 3 weeks. The weather was terrible. Any normal person would have just waited in their tent for these 3 days, but I didn't have those 3 days to spare. A buddy of mine met me over there, and we went literally nobody on the mountain climbed those 3 days. They just sat in their tents, and we're out there on the summit in 50, 60 mile per hour winds, getting beat up. And keep in mind, this is not just climbing Denali like that anyways would be tough, but I was 139 days of nonstop climbing and world travel into this project. I was on my last, that amount of energy, even by the time I showed up over there, let alone, getting to the summit of the mountain. So, but we ended up pulling it off with a day to spare for the second world record, and set 2 world records for the Explorers Grand Slam and the 7 summits. And again, in this moment, standing on felt somewhat similar to that finish line of the triathlon. in the sense of it was amazing to be on that summit, and it was amazing to know I'd set these first 2 world records in my career. But it was also this cataloging back to these turning points in my life, right? These moments of like, hey, you'll never walk again normally, or why would you quit your job and follow your heart towards triathlon? That's a terrible idea for your career. Or you don't have enough money. You're never going to raise this money to pull off these projects, right? Like all of these points where a few limiting beliefs would have easily, and for oftentimes for people, would have just been like, you're right, I should give up. You're right, I'm never going to pull this off. You're right, this isn't going to work. But then to be at that moment, this high, this peak moment, and realize I had done it. And something that I talk about in the 12-hour walk that I think is important to share in this moment right here is coming up for me anyways, is, this moment on this summit was a 10 for me. I come to think of life kind of on a scale of 1 to 10, 1 being our lowest low moments in our life and 10 being our highest highs. And of course, setting these 2 world records, in the nick of time, top of the mountain in Denali, this epic moment, like that was a 10, man. Like that was like a peak life moment. But then I come to realize that I didn't get there in spite of my ones, by not having bad experiences happen to me. I actually was on the summit of this mountain because of my ones. Because of getting burned in a fire, but my mom teaching me these lessons, because of getting knocked on my ass several times, racing triathlon, because of the 1,000 doors that slammed in my face, but me having the resilience to say, I'm going to keep trying to get sponsors. I'm going to be trying to figure this out, whatever. So I realized that not just my 10s, but all of our 10s in our lives are derivative, are because of our ones. And when I mean because of our ones is, I've come to realize, if I talk to so many people, why are you not living your best life? So the subtitle of my book is Invest One Day, Conquer Your Mind, Unlock Your Best Life. And so I've asked the question, why are you not living your best life? I get all sorts of questions. I don't have enough money. I don't have enough time. These limiting beliefs. What I really think it boils down to is that in our modern society, it's very easy to live in the 4 and 6 range. And that's the range that I call the zone of comfortable complacency. Like you got a job, like it's fine. It pays the bills, puts a roof over your head, whatever. Like you don't love it. It's not super fun. You don't hate it. Like it's fine. Like it's a 5. It's like, it's whatever. Or, you've been dating somebody for a few years, you cohabitate. It's not toxic. It's not abusive. It's not like whatever, but it's fine. It's just like, it's fine. Like, whatever. And we are so afraid as humans of having any downside risks. We hedge so hard against taking any risk where we might experience deep hardship, the ones, that in doing so, we actually take off the table the 10s, meaning I believe to experience the 10s, you got to experience some ones. You actually have to let that pendulum swing, the peak arc both ways of those things. And as we have become to realize that, I'm like, that people ask me, Colin, are you afraid of dying? Are you afraid of dying? I mean, I've been in all these situations. I've recently lost friends in an expedition on K2 in winter. And I write about that story in the book, The 12-Hour Walk. But what I've come to realize is that our 10s and our ones are connected. And if you're just sitting there day in, day out, week in, week out, month in, year out, in this zone of comfortable complacency, am I afraid of dying? Yeah, I'm afraid of dying. I don't want to die. I don't think I'm some ridiculous, insane risk taker. But you know what I'm even more afraid of? I'm afraid of not living. I'm afraid of not living. And a life just sitting. Do you have to be in that zone of comfortable complacency sometimes? Absolutely. That's where we recover. That's where we rest. That's where we regenerate. That's an important zone. But I can't be there all the time. The full tapestry, the fullness of a life well lived, our best lives, deep fulfillment, love, empathy, trust, compassion, the peak arcs of these moments of achievement, whatever that looks like for you, your own Everest. Doesn't have to be a mountaintop, but your own Everest. What's your own Everest? That requires you to take the risk, to feel some of those ones, to embrace the discomfort sometimes, because that ultimately opens the door to these 10s.
Yeah, no, that's a good piece of advice. I agree with you in so many ways, and I think if more people would listen to that, the problem is like the ones suck, and they're no fun. It's like when you're shooting a rifle or you know, most people flinch when they're shooting a rifle. Even the most experienced marksmen will sometimes flinch, and it's because your brain naturally is in survival mode. If you know there's going to be an explosion, your brain is going to brace for it. And I think life is similar to where if you know that there's a chance that you might die or something bad might happen, we've braced for it because we've been programmed to survive. So you almost got to sort of re-engineer your brain in a way. It's like in a way that allows you to take just enough risk to really experience the highs and the lows. Now, I also think there's benefit in just constant improvement and keeping that line, like avoiding the super duper lows and avoiding the super duper duper highs. But to your point, allowing both, that's how you're going to live the most interesting life. And that's what adventure is all about. Adventure is about not knowing, but fucking figuring it out. Speaking of that,
one of my favorite quotes is, I want to hear your next question, but one of my favorite quotes on that line, I think it's Amundsen said it, the guy who got to the South Pole first, Norwegian guy. He goes, "Adventure is just bad planning."
Yeah. That's awesome. I've never heard that before. Dude, okay, so the obviously since my brother's been working with you, I've followed along with a lot of your stuff, and I actually got to ride in the RV when you did the 50, what was it called? The 50 highest
high
peaks?
points. Yeah.
But I really, really deeply followed along with this K2 expedition because I remember watching the movie K2. I read Krakauer's Into Thin Air. My dad was obsessed with the Himalayas. He's read all the books. He knows all the camps. He knows all the peaks. Anyways, I followed that expedition. To me, that looked like obviously there was tragedy. That was hard. I can only imagine. But just the actual physical and mental aspect of the expedition itself looked incredibly, incredibly, incredibly difficult. Like, tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah. Well, I wanna mention just before we'll get into K2, and that was actually, I told a story about the Explorers Grand Slam in Denali, but the fact of the matter is the most difficult expedition I've ever been on by far, far and away the most dangerous, the most difficult, the most brutal, even more brutal than crossing Antarctica solo for 54 days was attempting to climb K2 in winter. The second tallest mountain in the world, widely considered the most dangerous mountain in the world. We'll talk about that.
Is that what it's considered? Because I always get confused. It's considered the most dangerous mountain, not necessarily the most difficult technically to climb. Is there a delineation there?
They're somewhat part and parcel of each other. When you get into sort of technical ratings, like you can find some obscure route, even like in the Tetons, up some insane cliff band or whatever, that's going to be on the highest gradient of technicality, right? Okay. Like meaning the easiest pass up the Grand Teton is still very difficult, but not that difficult. But you can, you could find at your local cliff somewhere, it's something where there's like no handholds, nothing, and it's just like brutal. But in terms of the high Himalaya, so I don't know if you've seen, there's a Netflix documentary called 14 Peaks about this guy Nims, who I know well, who's actually on K2 at the same time I was. We've been on Everest together. But that movie is about the 14 tallest mountains in the world and his incredible record to climb all of them. With a team of Nepalese Sherpas, and he's Nepalese as well. Amazing movie if you haven't seen it. But the 14 8,000 meter peaks, those are the 14 tallest mountains in the world. So for us Americans, 8,000 meters is roughly 26,000 feet. That's sort of the delineation of what's considered the death zone, an altitude above where the human body, even with supplemental oxygen, certainly without, is slowly dying. Like you just can't survive up there. So when you dip your body above 8,000 meters or 26,000 feet, it's like you're on borrowed time. And that's what it's like on the summit of Everest. And that's what it's like on K2. So K2 is about, I don't know what it is, 500 feet or something like that, lower than Everest. So it's a little bit lower than Everest, second tallest mountain in the world, but is significantly more remote, significantly more, it's in Pakistan, in rural Pakistan, on the Chinese-Pakistan border, and significantly more technical. So is it the most technical mountain in the world? I don't know. What ends up happening is any extremely technical section, which K2 has many, Essentially there's this, the Abruzzi Ridge is this 8,000 foot direct ridge line towards the summit of technical ice and rock and snow, and it's unrelenting, and you're sleeping on these tiny little ledges with 5,000 feet exposure on either side of you. I mean, it's an intense place. But you're also at altitude. So if you took one of those features and you put it at sea level, it would still be ridiculously hard. But now you put that up at 22, 24, 25,000 feet, and it's like your brain's not working, your body's not working. Every step is hard earned, and you're climbing this incredibly difficult technical terrain. It's rough. So by the numbers, why they say K2 is the most dangerous, there's a couple that are similar, and Annapurna being one of them. But essentially, the K2 has a summit success to death ratio of about 75-25. So for every 4 people that have summited K2, 25% of them, 70 to 80 of them have died in attempting that. And what we were attempting to do was, now I look back on it and go, I don't know if we were just silly or I still appreciate the effort, but obviously there's a lot of sadness there for me as well, given what ended up happening. But we ended up climbing, we were attempting to climb K2 in winter. And so of the 14 8,000 meter peaks, over time, Everest was first summited in the early 50s. And then from there on, the other 8,000 meter peaks were climbed. And they were climbed progressively over time in big teams. And then in the 70s and 80s, they were all climbed solo or solo without oxygen. There's a famous mountaineer named Reinhold Messner who did that, kind of the godfather of high altitude mountaineering. And then, mountaineers are always looking to how to ratchet up. Okay, well, what's a harder route up this mountain? What's a more difficult way to do this mountain? And the next thing that got popular in the late 80s and through the 90s was winter climbing. So it's like, great, you climb this in summer when the sun's out and the days are long or whatever. What's hardcore, and who actually got super into this first was the Polish. It's a stereotype, I suppose, but man, those Polish dudes are some hardcore badass dudes that know a little thing or two about cold and pain and suffering at high altitudes. Yeah. And there was a really advanced team of Polish guys who I think made the first 8 or 9 first ascents in winter, 8,000 meter peaks. But interestingly enough, even into the 2000s, there was a few peaks, these 8,000 meter peaks that had been attempted several times, even by the Polish, and had never been summited. And then in 2016, a mountain called Nanga Parbat in Pakistan was climbed in winter by a Pakistani guy, a couple friends, actually a guy, Ali Sapara, who was on that Pakistan expedition with me on K2 years later in 2021. They summited Nanga Parbat. And that was the second last of all the 8,000 meter peaks to be climbed, which meant that K2 was the last remaining 8,000 meter peak unclimbed in winter. And K2 already has this like allure in the mountaineering world. But this is like, you're like, oh, shoot, like K2, the crown jewel of climbing any time of year, now is like the last remaining unclimbed peak in winter. And so naturally, it inspired and lit up the imagination of myself and many of the top mountaineers and adventurers in the world. We're kind of like, whoa, whoever gets that's a worthy endeavor, a worthy prize, and comes with a significant amount of risk. And so we found ourselves over there in late 2020 into early 2021, me and my climbing partner, a guy named Dr. John, who I know you were amazing to help us out on the 50 high points and getting on the RV that we used to crisscross the United States as we set that world record. So Dave, thank you for that support.
Yeah, I slept with a hangover on your RV from Chicago from Chicago to Denver. So I don't know what I did, but it was fun.
We'll talk about K2 more. But for the listeners, we got a shot. We've mentioned Blake, Dave's brother, a handful of times here, but Blake has literally been like my right-hand guy in all sorts of things. He's one of the most creative, incredible, collaborative geniuses ever. All of my books and my speeches and stuff, him and I have worked on them together. But he also is not afraid to get his hands dirty and do other stuff. So I'm doing this 50 high points world record. I ultimately climbed the tallest peak in each of the 50 US states in 21 days, which is a physical feat, challenge. It's also a logistical feat of ridiculous proportions. You're like, wait a second, 50 peaks across that many miles, and that, like, how does that even work? And well, one of the ways that works is you got to have an RV and some people like you and your brother who are willing to drive that thing, thousands of miles in the middle of the night to pick me up from one place, to drop me off at the other place. And I want to never do this, but I want to read this. So the new book, The 12-Hour Walk, Blake was the challenge for everyone, ultimate at the core of this book, that I want a quick intermission, is it's a book about overcoming mindset, overcoming your own limiting beliefs. It's a book about unlocking your best life, but at its core, there's a single call to action that invites everyone to participate in. And Dave's brother Blake was one of the very first people to test this, which is to take your own 12-hour walk, which is literally saying, you want to cultivate a strong mind, you want to break free of that zone of comfortable complacency. Well, here's how you do it. From my experience, which is walk out your front door, pick a day, put your phone on airplane mode, and go for a walk 12 hours in silence. No music, no podcast, no external inputs, alone, right from your front door. And this isn't some crazy endurance feat. If you're in great shape, fine. But no matter where you're at, this meets you where you're at. Take as many breaks as you want. Car noise, people walking past you doesn't break your solitude, but it's about being alone in your thoughts for 12 hours. And most people in our modern day, I mean, even if you spend a lot of time in adventure, hunting with your buddies or whatever, it's rare that people spend that much time alone in silence in their own brains. And it's tough. It's challenging. A lot of those limiting beliefs do come up. But what I found is when people complete the 12-hour walk, they get back from that 12-hour walk, they are elated. They've had massive breakthroughs. They're on their way to putting aside those limiting beliefs and cultivating their possible mindset. So for me, my next expedition, people always ask me, but my next big passion in releasing this book is actually to inspire 10 million people to take the 12-hour walk. You can go to the 12hourwalk.com website, check all of that out, sign up for it. But Dave's brother Blake was literally with me. It's been and by my side in so many things I've done, as I mentioned, when I kind of came up with this idea, which was derivative of my time walking alone in Antarctica, and was ultimately born from some depression and anxiety I was feeling during COVID. My way of coping with that was going out for these long walks. And then Blake was one of my very first test subjects, where I said, hey, I've got this idea, will you test it out for me? And he ended up walking his first marathon, crossed 26 miles. And there's a video of him finishing that's on the 12-hour walk Instagram right now. And it's emotional. He's crying, but he's proud. And he's like, oh my God, this was a life-changing experience. So I'll read this. It's a paragraph, but in the acknowledgments of my book, because I have no way to thank your brother Blake for all the things he's done with me and for me over time. But I wrote, Blake Brinker. That's my acknowledgments of the book. Blake Brinker, my ride or die. You're a true creative master. Any person hoping to bring a big idea into the world would be lucky to have you in their corner. It's been a true honor to work with you to nurture this idea of the 12-hour walk from inception to fruition. Not only are you one of my dearest friends, but also one of my greatest teachers. I'm eternally grateful for our many collaborations over the years, and I look forward to many more days playing in the control booth together. Thanks for being the initial willing test subject for the walk. I hope millions will ultimately complete it, but you will always be the first. So anyways, man, your brother, you already know this. He's the freaking man. And the 12-hour walk has been an amazing thing to build.
Yeah, I remember the day he did that. And we were talking about it in the book and all these things. And I think I've done this before, but obviously because I spent a lot of time in the woods by myself for long periods of time, but I'm pretty distracted on the task. I've never just done it to be in my own mind, because when you're hunting, you're pretty focused on what you're doing, right? You're being creative, you're thinking through the situations. I've never just gone for a walk just to go for a walk, but I am planning on doing this. I will be part of the 10 million people. So now you only need 9,999,999.
Amazing. Yeah. Well, anyone who's listening to this, you can do it any day, pick up the book. But we are, if you're listening to this before September 10th, on September 10th, we are inviting sort of mass participation, meaning you're still doing it alone. You're still doing it from your front door. And Dave, you put the nail on the head, which is it's about intentionally not having those distractions. It's intentionally not doing a task, but actually, other than walking, just letting your mind kind of cycle through all the different thoughts through the course of a day, which at times can be tough, at times can be boring, at times can be frustrating. But I've ultimately seen this alpinists, people that are stuck, people that are looking for a professional edge, people that are trying to strengthen their mind. By the end of this 12-hour walk, it's insane what this one day investment in yourself can do. And the book is really an essential companion to break down this, but from the edge of it, not some boring, academic textbook. If you want to hear about, we'll talk more right now about K2, but K2 and Everest and rowing a boat at Great Passage and walking across Antarctica, all the different stories and anecdotes about that, but through the lens of how everyone can be the hero of their own journey. But yeah, man, I'm excited to have you join the 12-hour walk.
So there is one problem, Colin. I don't make commitments in September, but
okay. Oh, right. That's big hunting season.
Yeah. So I got to be honest with you. I'm not going to do it September 10th.
That's all good.
I might do a 12-hour walk, but it's going to be chasing big elk. But I will commit to doing it this year. All right.
August, October, or whenever you fill your tag. Don't make the commitment in September. I know that's a very sacred month for you.
Yeah.
But for those of you who aren't as sacred about your elk tag or whatever you got going in September, you can do it. And honestly, it's built to do any day. You can go to the 12hourwalk.com, sign up, register. It's completely free for everyone to join, but it'll help me, send you some extra inspirational oomph, as well as I have an app. Funny enough, it's all about turning your phone off and putting it in airplane mode, but I've built an app. Your brother and I have built an app that actually, helps you put your phone in airplane mode, but also tracks you, probably like some of the hunting trackers you use, which is it tracks. Yeah, the one thing I was like, well, people aren't going to want to put their phone in airplane mode and they're going to get lost because they want to look at their Google Maps. And I was like, fine, I'll solve that problem for you, which is I have a map interface in the 12-hour walk app that will track your walk, tell you how far you've gone. You can zoom in if you want to, should I turn right or turn left here? Because it's got a map. But that's it. The rest of the time, your phone's on airplane mode. So download the app, sign up, be a part of this global movement. And like I said, invest one day, conquer your mind, and unlock your best life.
Well, I know we have a hard stop here shortly. I did have a couple things.
Let's talk K2. We can talk K2.
Well, no, we can get back to K2. I do want to get back to that, maybe in another conversation. But there's something I've been meaning to ask you about, dude. The documentary The Alpinist changed my life. And I've been wanting to ask you about this. I've never got to sit down and ask you about this. What were your thoughts on that documentary? Obviously, I love 14 Peaks too. But the difference for me between, and I don't know NIMS, the difference between those two documentaries for me was Mark DeAndre came off as sort of this... he wasn't in it for anything other than he just wanted to do it. And I'm not saying NIMS is, or that they even need to be compared. My point is like that documentary really struck something with me. One of the things was, holy shit, that's like a whole nother level of crazy town climbing. But also just mindset and there are no barriers. It's like, so what was your thoughts on that documentary? I know you went to the premiere did Blake go to that with you? Maybe, but I can't remember.
Blake went to the premiere of Free Solo with
gotcha.
Alex Honnold, which is there's some good connective.
Oh my, yeah, exactly. And I love that one too. Free Solo is crazy.
Yeah, look, it's not my place to say, oh, this film is better than that film, whatever. Yeah. But I agree with you. The Alpinist is pure gold. The few films ever in the pantheon of all films, let alone in the adventure space, have spoke to me at such a depth level. So highly recommend everyone checking it out. I think most people have seen Free Solo. Hopefully more people have seen The Alpinist now. I know it's on Netflix. But what Alex Honnold did in Free Solo, which is, for people unfamiliar, it's the guy who climbed El Cap with no ropes, Free Solo, no ropes, nothing, just him and a bag of chalk, which is just absolute insanity.
It'll make you. It makes me it gives me goosebumps watching it. I get very nervous. I get sweaty palms.
To me. And I know Alex a little bit, and we both spoke at the Aspen Institute a few years back. I've heard him speak, whatever. And what he did in Free Solo, to me, ranks as one of the highest, greatest, most badass human achievements. Not just in the world of climbing, but just in the world of human achievement, mindset, skill, consequence, flow state. It's just insane. And then to frame that against The Alpinist is The Alpinist opens up and the documentarian is actually interviewing Alex Honnold.
Mm-hmm.
So like the badass guy of the all badass guy, and he goes, "So Alex, like, are you just in a league of your own, or are you the most badass guy on the planet, or is there anyone else you're impressed by?" And Alex, without hesitation, goes, "Oh, no. There's this guy named Marc-Andre who is doing 10 times more crazy shit than I've ever dreamed up or I would ever dare to do. And he's basically what you said. He's just doing it quietly without telling anybody about it, just for the pure love of the game. Like, check out this guy." And what Marc-Andre was doing is just having been in the mountains, having been in, high risk, intense situations, having lost friends on mountains, having, knowing how easy it is to make one mistake and have it all be over. The commitment that he was doing, it's one thing, Alex Honnold, here's the biggest difference. Alex Honnold's climbing rocks, right? Without rope, which is, again, above. I've climbed some easier low angle stuff without rocks that maybe would make you afraid. But what Alex Honnold is doing is, one finger crimp and one toe on a thing with, it's like insane, right? But rocks don't generally move, right. Here and there they'll break or whatever, but it's a pretty reliable thing. So before Alex did that climb, he rehearsed it like a dance. He knew every finger placement, every move, every dance of it. And he practiced it with ropes to then be prepared to do it without ropes. Whereas Marc-Andre is going out there in ice and snow, which, by the way, is different every single hour it is. And it melts and it shits ever. And he's climbing as consequential terrain as Alex is climbing on rocks, but on this ever-moving landscape. And oftentimes, as you see in the film, on peaks that he's never seen before. So in the world of climbing, that's called on-site. And on-site is when you just walk up to something, no one's ever told you the tips and tricks of this route, and you just start climbing up it. And it's one thing to, like, I don't know, go to Mount Hood or, some, reasonably big peak or something like that and just kind of figure it out. It's another thing to, like, go to the Canadian Rockies, some vertical ice and snow cliff by yourself, like Marc-Andre's doing, with a couple of ice axes and, like, a couple of granola bars, and just be like, I think I'm just going to, like, go up this vertical ice and, like, just, like, figure it out. Like, I mean, it is insane. But what I think why that film there's, and I love, Jimmy Chin, who was directed Free Solo, has certainly been on the, big uplift in helping the storytelling of climbing films really uplift its game, which is, and your brother Blake is a master storyteller. We've had so fun talking about that craft and writing stuff over the years. But we both admire this film so much because of this reason, which is the feats in themselves are insane. If you just, you want to watch the GoPro clips of this guy climbing these insane cliffs, like, you just be like, holy shit, man, like, this is next level. But what makes The Alpinist what it is the storytelling. Is Marc-Andre as a human being being interviewed, like, you get a sense of his soul. You get a sense of this guy, and at his core, there, at least to me, my perception, I'd be curious to hear your perspective, Dave, was like, it doesn't feel like there's a lot of ego there. It doesn't feel like there's a lot of intense gravitas, look at me kind of stuff. Like, there is this, it's an art to him. It's a dance. It's like a pureness of the love of the game. And they do such a great job of bringing out his character, his spirit, his human being, set against the backdrop of these insane things that he's doing. I don't know. I'd love to hear your perspective, but that's my hot take on the film. Yeah,
just the pure authenticity that like oozes out of the film because of how just raw and real he is. I'm a marketer by trade, and I spent a lot of time marketing for outdoor brands. And one of the things you look for when you're working with people is authenticity. It's like the most important things, because people that are authentic more easily connect to their communities. And every once in a while you'll stumble across somebody. It's very hard to do. Most of us can't do this, is because we all like to be accepted and we all want to be seen and heard. But he's like, no, not really. I just want to climb. I don't need any cameras or anything. I'm not even going to take a phone. I have no way out if I get in trouble. I'm just doing this because I love it. If you can truly find somebody like that, it's pretty, like, we're just drawn to that, like, because we're all a little bit different than that.
And
We're like,
yeah, I mean, there's a scene in the film where I think it was Red Bull or some big production company that gets behind filming him, right? Which is like, to your point, and certainly I know this from the climbing world, that's like the pinnacle. That's sort of like the dream scenario. Like, you got like a big Red Bull production, high budget camera crews, drones, like people spending money to like tell your story at broad scale to the world. And the documentarian, they don't often do this in documentary films, but they actually have to bring themselves into the film as characters, behind, usually this guy's behind the camera, right?
yeah.
And there's a scene, I'll never forget it, where they're in the middle of filming this documentary about him, and then all of a sudden, like, his phone just stops like ringing and picking up, and they can't find him for 3 months. Like, they're like, we are filming a documentary about you during this climbing season, and he just like leaves his cell phone at home and goes in the backcountry for 3 months. And then they're like, had to shut down the whole production because they're like, we literally can't find the guy who we have a film about. And then he finally gets out of the backcountry after doing like some of the most insane routes ever. And then he calls him. He's like, hey, have you guys been trying to reach me? And they're like, yeah. What have you been doing? He's like, oh, I free soloed this route and that route, and that, which would have been like the most epic film in itself. And the guys are like, wait, what? You did that and we couldn't film? Like, what? He was like, oh, I just felt like it'd be better if I was just, I don't know. It was just like ridiculous. But like you said, just for the love of the game, man, purely for the love of the game.
Well, I think, cool. I think though it crosses over very well into what we've been talking about, and is another great example of just removing this beautiful way of just removing all barriers, blinders on. It's like, oh, there's a cool mountain. I think I'll climb it. Like, it's like, totally. I got a backpack and a couple ice axes, a granola bar or two, and like a bottle of water. I can probably get up. I don't know how I'm going to get down, which ultimately was what happened. I think, I'm not a climber, but it seemed like in the film that was kind of portrayed, and ultimate tragedy at the end of the film. But sorry, spoiler alert. But Colin, one last question, and then I want to talk a little bit about where people can find all the cool things that you're working on. What are your biggest regrets?
Regrets? That's a good question. The opening chapter of the 12-Hour Walk, small spoiler alert, but I think you'll still enjoy the whole book, is I open up by telling a story about regrets. In this case, there's a story about someone else's regrets. I was given a speech in Manhattan to a group of Wall Street gajillionaires. And I was sort of feeling a little bit out of place in my black t-shirt and jeans while they're wearing Armani suits and $100,000 watches. And these guys are mid 60s into mid 70s, older guys who've had a lot of financial success. And I asked them this question at the dinner table, because they're asking me a million questions about adventure. Tell me about Antarctica, tell me about Everest, whatever I'm telling them. And I like to flip that question, as I mentioned before, on other people. And I say, well, what was your guys' Everest? What was your childhood dream? How'd you get here? How'd you end up here? And usually that's a really fun, thought-provoking conversation starter. And all of a sudden, like, these guys who were super confident, successful, whatever, like, kind of just clam up. And no one really wants to answer that vulnerable of a question. And so, as an awkward moment passes at a dinner, you just kind of keep talking about other stuff and you move past it. And so I'm getting ready to leave. That dinner, and I'm going to take the elevator back down and to my hotel. This guy from the dinner pulls up beside me and grabs my arm. He's probably the oldest gentleman at the table. I'm just guessing, 75, 80 years old, older gentleman. And he says, I have to apologize for myself and my friends. You asked us all a really insightful question and none of us answered. And I said, I haven't stopped thinking about it since. And he goes, strangely, without an ounce of bluster, he wasn't trying to like big dog me or anything like that. He goes, I have made more money than you could possibly imagine. I don't know if this guy was a billionaire, but certainly hundreds of millions, just, obscenely wealthy guy. And he goes, but I think my life would have turned out a lot better and a lot differently for myself if I dared to ask myself that question, what's my Everest? Essentially, offering regret,
Mm.
saying it might appear from the outside looking in that I have done all the things and made all the money or whatever. And he goes, I keep thinking back to the simplicity, he says, of being at summer camp as a kid, sitting on this lake, an alpine lake in the, I don't know, upstate New York or something like that. And I missed a lifetime of these moments, chasing this other thing that I think other people wanted for me. And so I offer that up in the book as a way of thinking about regrets. And I certainly have regrets in my life somewhat, although one of my biggest anchors is, and why I have a continual check-in with asking myself, well, what's my Everest? Okay, I've climbed Everest, but what's my next Everest? What's the next thing I want to achieve? And this isn't about achievement. I think it's easy to think about it, the word Everest as an achievement, but your Everest could be, starting a business. It could be about making $1 million. It could be about saving 1 million lives. It could be about art, music, culture, entrepreneurship, passion. I mean, we're talking about fulfillment, right? We're talking about a life well lived.
Yes.
And I offer that up at the beginning of the 12-hour walk, and why this has become such a passion of mine to share this, as well as to repeat this exercise, myself, is not just a once in a lifetime check-in of like, oh, where do I want to go? But a continual check-in over moments of time, as a quarter goes by or as a year goes by, like, well, what's still lighting me up? What do I want to do? Where do I want to spend my time? And I know you as a musician, you as a podcast host, you as a father, you as a this, I look at you as somebody who has, maybe hasn't all figured it out, but clearly have answered those questions around what your priorities are. And so I know we're running out of time for you to probably share all of my regrets, but I certainly have some. But one of my biggest anchors is to not be that regret-filled man at 80 years old going, I've run out of time to conquer my Everest, even if it looks like I think he said something like, I have climbed a lot of mountains. I'm at the apex and at the summit of all sorts of things, but I didn't climb my Everest. And that's really what the 12-hour walk is about, which is that answer is different for every single person. There's no right answer to that question, but it's about daring to dream and daring
people often always jump to money first. Right. It's always money. So when does the 12-hour walk come out? Where can people find it, and where can people find out? Because you also have another book, The Impossible First, and lots of other cool things, lots of stuff if you just Google Colin O'Brady. But where do specifically on the... Well, folks, Colin and I had a little bit of a technical difficulty, and we had to end the episode a little bit too soon. But I wanted to make sure that you go check out his website, 12hourwalk.com. That's a number 12hourwalk.com to register for your walk. And pick up a copy of the 12-Hour Walk book, available everywhere books are sold. And don't forget to follow Colin Brady on Instagram, follow me on Instagram, subscribe to our YouTube. You can watch the entire episode on our YouTube channel, The Altitude Show. You can also watch clips from the episode on my Instagram and the YouTube. Thanks for tuning in today. I appreciate you.